We come now to section 6, which is the final section of this module. Here we look not so much at technology issues, but people issues and the kind of things that will help to make project a success or failure. This section specifically aims to discuss key issues determining success or failure of ICT for development programs and to conclude the discussion of macro issues in the relationship between ICTs and SDGs, and to establish key linkages between this module and other modules. An ICT for development policy is different from an IT policy. An ICT for development policy specifies particularly the ways in which technology will be used to address national development priorities. So an ICT policy requires new systems of planning, management, and project implementation characterized by the active engagement and participation of different sectors of the economy and the community. Maximizing the use of ICTs requires an understanding of both its potentials and its limitations. Convergence, which is a governing principle of technology today, means more than just a technology coming together. It means a merger of many disciplines, in particular the engineering sciences and the social and behavioral sciences. Convergence also means a multi-stakeholder partnership where government can implement a favorable policy, regulation, funding, and capacity building. The private sector can build infrastructure and invest in services. Civil society can work with communities, and communities can own and drive initiatives. When we look at ICT for the interventions, the first thing that we have to look for is whether the intervention will be driven by technology or ICT driven, or will it support a given goal. ICT driven assumes that timely and relevant information through ICTs will and of itself promote economic growth through increased income. Whereas ICT supported clarifies the development goal first, works out the ICT needs, and then looks at cost-effective ways of deploying the ICT to address project objectives. Some clarity is needed about development goals and outcomes. These have to be demand rather than supply driven. They must be sensitive to local conditions and limitations. They must be sensitive to limitations relating to infrastructure, access, relevance, language, content, and they must be robust and sustainable. Initiatives should be process-oriented rather than merely duration or target-driven. And the key to successful implementation is that all organizational and attitude and systematic changes become important. So in planning an ICT for the intervention, it is necessary to establish benchmarks against which to monitor and assess progress and effectiveness during and after various interventions. To do this, one has to understand what are the felt and unfelt needs of a community, what are the real needs and what are the constraints, what are the socio-cultural needs, values, and norms, and what are the communication needs of people. It is only after having such baseline information that one can proceed to design a project. Then there are technology issues. Technology issues consist of reach versus access. The mere fact of a footprint of telecommunications covering an entire country does not mean that each and every citizen can have access to it. They may not have access because they don't have electricity, or they may not have a mobile phone to access the service. Who controls and who owns the technology also plays an important role as a decision point in planning in interventions. Next question is the intervention technology driven or people driven? And what are the costs? There are also content challenges and issues. One of the major concerns is that there is a lack of local content in local languages because there's a challenge of language and localization. There's a challenge of content relevance. There is the choice between proprietary and open source applications. There's a use of Web 2.0 or user-generated content. Differences and nuances between content issues can make a great deal of difference in implementing projects. In ICT for development projects, there is a challenge of scale. When a project is small, it often shows results. When it's upscaled, it loses the very features that made it successful. On the other hand, when a national project is planned, it tends to address broad societal needs rather than location-specific and problem-specific needs. More than any of this, there is an urgent need for capacity building of policymakers, decision makers, planning and project designers, champions, and for training of trainers. And finally, it is necessary to build partnerships. Partnerships are not easy to build and to maintain. One other aspect of project implementation deserves special attention, and that is project evaluation. In very simple terms, evaluation is necessary to know if a solution succeeded or failed to achieve its objectives. As a planning tool, evaluation is needed to determine whether the ICT for D solution is likely to meet the needs of all stakeholders, the donors and the funding agencies, the implementing agencies, and the beneficiaries. Evaluation is necessary to establish that the solution is financially and socially sustainable. Evaluation is also needed to establish whether investment in a solution is worth the expenditure. There are 3 stages of evaluation. The first is the formative stage, which precedes a program or project design. It is the collection of baseline information and the planning of the project, sometimes the development of an inception report. Then there is a second stage, which is the process, where you monitor progress, identify gaps to take mid-course corrections. And finally, there is a summative evaluation after the program or project has completed. One of the best known tools available in the world today to assess ICT for development projects is the GEM methodology developed by the Philippines. And finally, documenting an ICTD project will help us to understand where the problems are. Overall, I would like to say in summarizing that a people-centric rather than an ICT-centric approach is critical for ICTD programmers and projects to succeed. The factors that spell the difference between success and failure are usually clarity of objectives, target groups, intermediaries, policy and institutional arrangements, capacity building efforts, technology choices, content, and funding models. A successful small-scale initiative requires more than just a replication in a different context to succeed. Scaling up of an ICTD effort requires whole-scale institutional reform and change management. Evaluation is an ongoing process, and it is a very important part of all development projects, irrespective of whether technology is included or not. This module in the Academy of ICT Essentials for Government Leaders addresses the broad issues of development and argues for a meaningful application of appropriate ICTs toward achieving the goals. Following an introduction, the module focuses its attention on goals, uses illustrative cases, and applications in various sectors. The module also explores integrating ICTs into mainstream development policy, and then finally, a discussion on the not-so-obvious challenges in the application of ICTs for development are explored. This module emphasizes that a people-centric rather than a technology-centric approach to ICTs is necessary for better outcomes. This module, which was the first in the older series and continues to contain broad and general information, links with the other modules in this series, in that while this is an introduction, other modules go into depth about given and specific topics. So enjoy the module, read it through, listen to and view this presentation as a supplement with the module beside you so that you can delve deeper into the text in order to understand the context. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation, which is actually a summary, and I hope you enjoy learning from the experience of others, and I hope that I have been able to provide the necessary and useful information for all of you. Thank you.